Good afternoon. This is Jason Fish. I'm here with Emily Woost and Robin Bravi, and we are doing a flipped book study on the book that we chose to read for our class, Leading in a Culture of Change by Michael Fullan. Each of us have chosen a chapter of the book that we're going to review briefly for you, and at the end of the lesson, we'll have a slide that has an assignment for you to come to class to be prepared to do some discussion on some of the things that we drew out as some interesting things to talk about in this book. So we'll start out with Robin, then Emily will have her presentation, and then I'll conclude with my presentation and the assignment at the end.
All right, thank you, Jason. I'm up first, and I'm going to talk to you guys about knowledge building. You can see here are some of the key points that I took away from this chapter. The first one being information only becomes valuable in a social context. When I read this in the book, I really started to think about the social media and how it's really big in our lives right now, such as Twitter and Facebook, and how we're communicating all the time to people, but what kind of knowledge are we sharing with people, and especially what kind of knowledge are we sharing within our building? So that got to me thinking about that. The next one is create new setting for learning and sharing. What kind of environments do we have in our buildings where we can freely share the knowledge that we have or that we don't even realize that we have? The next one is individuals must rely on others to listen and react to their ideas. This is a key one. How many times do we find ourselves sharing something and we're noticing that people aren't really listening to us? They may be listening, but we're not getting any reaction from that. And that's really important to see that. The next one is people will only share if they see the idea as really important. This is really important because we're not going to share our knowledge that we have unless we find that it appeals to maybe our core values or our moral purposes. The next one is create incentives and opportunities for people to engage in sharing. That's really key because it needs to be a place where they're going to feel like they can, maybe even if there is an incentive of some kind. And then the last one, the book kept bringing up again and again how in businesses and in education, it needs to be a core value. Knowledge needs to be something that is important to everybody there. So what I want you guys to do is I want you to bring some knowledge to share, and you have knowledge, you really do, and I'm going to point out how you can bring some knowledge. I want you guys to think of a lesson or an activity that you've taught this week or this past week, and I want you to answer these questions. So when you were doing your lesson, what was supposed to happen? When you started out the lesson or the activity, what was your goal at the end for the lesson to take place? The second one is what really happened when you finished that lesson. And then the last one is think about what accounts for the difference between the two. And therein lies your knowledge that you're going to be able to share with us. All right, thank you very much for listening to me. I'm going to pass this over to Emily now.
Okay, thank you, Robin. The next chapter that was in our book was about the 7 essentials to building relationships. And really, the author identifies these. The first one is setting clear expectations. When we talked about this, a lot of these are like classroom expectations and what we expect from our students. The second was expecting the best. So no matter what the student, really seeing in our students their best potential and what they can really do if they work really hard and expecting the best out of them every time. The third is paying attention, and this in building relationships is key. Like Robin talked about with listening, it's key to really pay attention and listen while someone's talking rather than thinking of the response or the answer. Fourth was personalizing recognition, and so this looks like not just giving the same recognition to each individual, but looking to what that person needs to feel valued. Finally, telling the story, and so this is something working together to communicate and bringing forth the point in what you're teaching or what you're trying to communicate with the group. Celebrating together is really important. Like with Quantum, the celebration and finding the key and a success as a group brings the group together. And finally, setting the example. And this is really leading by example and modeling what you expect from the people around you. Some questions to think about from the book. The first one was, why should anyone be led by you? So kind of think about what you're doing and why your example should be led or should be followed. The next one we thought about was, how do I develop a culture in my school that gets people to understand what they can do together to help students? What we've noticed in our middle school is sometimes our students are put in separate groups, and so we're not looking at the students as a whole group, but rather in individual parts, but seeing the student as a whole and helping them together. The final thing we really thought was important to think about was we need to pay as much attention to how we treat people as we now typically pay attention to structures, strategies, and statistics. How do we lead this change? So that means that not just test scores or curriculum, but we also need to pay that much attention to relationships and how that can lead change. On to Jason.
Thank you. I chose to summarize the final chapter of the book, which is entitled The Hare and the Tortoise, and it's based on the analogy that we're all familiar with, the story about the hare and the tortoise were in a race together, and everybody assumed that the hare would win, but he didn't perform the way he should have, and the tortoise ended up winning because he just kept a slow and steady pace through the whole race. And so the writer uses that analogy and comes up with the notion that to ask the question, are you a harebrained leader or are you a tortoise-minded leader? And he draws some important distinctions about these two classifications. First of all, the harebrained leader chases relentless innovation. They're always looking for a quick fix to problems. They're always looking for the next fad or the next fashionable thing to be involved in. And they want to find a way to make themselves look like they're on the cutting edge of innovation, and not really seeing whether or not that innovative idea has any application to the problem that's at hand. They just want to be seen as innovative. The harebrained leader is also very sure of himself, and there's some problems with always being sure of yourself. First of all, it means you don't listen to others and what they have to contribute to the problem that is at hand because you think you know the answer yourself. The other problem that comes along is that they want to jump straight to a conclusion because they think that paints themselves as being very decisive and very quick to action. And sometimes in our society or in our way of thinking, that decisiveness or that quick move to action is often viewed as an asset when really it's not, because being too quick to act means we haven't taken into account all of the information that is available, and sometimes we jump to the wrong conclusions. And often a harebrained leader is larger than life. They're painted as kind of a hero, somebody that's riding in to save the day or coming into an organization that's troubled perhaps, and this larger than life leader shows up and they're able to just make all these sweeping changes and bring about quick solutions. The problem with that is it usually doesn't work. Having that larger than life leader, usually it's set up for failure. But even on those rare occasions when it does work and that larger than life leader is able to pull off the changes and save the day, what happens when that leader leaves? Then you're left with an organization that really doesn't know how to function without that leader being involved, and the organization suffers because of that leader in the end, even if that leader made some good changes while they were involved. And so we don't want to be harebrained leaders. Instead, what we want to be tortoise-minded leaders. And there's a couple of important facts there. One of the great phrases that he used in the book was this idea of being of practicing slow learning. And slow learning is important because it's not interested in being that relentless chase of innovation, but rather it's interested in bringing about all of the information and drawing in all of the people to help that we can within the context, which means within our organization, within our sphere of influence. And so we're bringing in answers from all people who have invested interest in finding the right solution, and it's done over time. It's looking at finding the right solution to fit the right problem rather than just looking for a quick fix. And then one of the key things about the tortoise-minded leader is that he knows he doesn't have all the answers. And so that forces him to be a good listener. It forces him to take advantage of all of the tools that are available to him rather than thinking that he's the one that has to ride in on the big white horse and save the day. One of the key things about being a tortoise-minded leader was an idea called negative capability. And the negative capability is the capacity to cultivate the ability to wait, to remain attentive in the face of incomprehension. When things are not going the way we think they should be, or when things are starting to fail, or maybe our project, we're implementing it, and all of a sudden people are asking us questions that we haven't thought about, that's that moment of incomprehension. I wasn't ready for that. I wasn't ready for those objections, or I wasn't ready for those questions that are being brought up. In that moment, a true leader is able to practice slow learning. They don't jump to conclusions. They don't reactively do things that ultimately will harm their project. And in that moment of incomprehension, that leader knows they don't have all the answers, and so they know they need to go find it. They need to find experts. They need to find somebody who can help them find those answers, and they're okay with it. They're able to react appropriately even in that moment of difficulty. So we want to be that tortoise-minded leader and make sure that that we're operating in the way that helps us win the race over time, rather than looking for a quick fix that ultimately is going to fail us. So I think overall the three of us really enjoyed this book. We would recommend it. It was an easy read. It's only about 140 pages, and we were able to get through it fairly easily within the couple of weeks that we had to read it. But at the same time, there's just tons of good information in this book, and a lot of really good points about leadership, especially leading within the context of change. So if you guys want to do some more research or reading in this topic, then this certainly would be a good book for you to look at. Now we want to present briefly the assignment for class discussion. Number one, as Robin talked about, bring a piece of knowledge to share. Bring something so that we can be a part of a community that shares the things that we learn with one another, and we can practice that sharing of knowledge within the social context like she talked about. The other thing that we want to do, there was a brief mention of this on one of the pages in the book, and we thought it would be an interesting exercise for us to go through this exercise together as a class. Choose 3 examples of authentic leaders from your personal experience or from history. 3 people that you think of as really good leaders, and describe them. Jot down some notes about what makes them exceptional leaders. Why did these 3 people make your list of authentic leaders? And we're going to kind of compile the characteristics that we see and see if we can draw some conclusions about what an authentic leader really looks like. We appreciate you for watching the video. We're looking forward to class and seeing what our discussion brings out. This is Jason signing off for Robin and Emily.